Hey guys, Zane here with another one-take review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Imperial Triumphant album, Spirit of Ecstasy. Spirit of Ecstasy is the latest studio album from avant-garde metal fan favorites, Imperial Triumphant. Imperial Triumphant, like many people, first came onto my radar back in 2020 when they released their last studio album, Alphaville, a very well-received album that, while very good, admittedly, was far from perfect, definitely had its flaws, and was kind of uninteresting at times as well, but nonetheless, it showed a lot of promise for a band that had already been around for a little while and were surely going to go on to do great things, or at least so that implied, but unfortunately, Spirit of Ecstasy is not the great things that I was really hoping it would be based off of their last record and all of the potential that they showed. One of the biggest problems that Spirit of Ecstasy faces is that it feels horrifically unfocused. Throughout this record, there are a number of non-metal passages which range from Gregorian chants to just simple string sections and even a little bit of brass thrown in here or there, and while I can appreciate all of those in the context of metal, trying to create something a bit different, a bit more unique, a bit more, again, avant-garde, none of it seems to really play a proper and legitimate role in the overall tone and sort of story that Spirit of Ecstasy tells. Rather, they just kind of feel like half-hearted attempts to make something that stands out at least a little bit from the band's previous efforts, all of which were reasonably experimental to varying levels, and if there's one thing worse than boring, unexperimental music, it's boring experimental music. I mean, truly, there is just no greater travesty than someone trying to make something highly experimental and unique and thus failing to deliver anything of substance with that forced uniqueness, everything just kind of being thrown at the listener with no sense of proper purpose in the context of the record, and that's in large part what Imperial Triumphant does here, and the record suffers because of it. Spirit of Ecstasy is also probably the band's heaviest album to date, with a number of doom metal and even black metal influences tossed in there, and also a couple of moments that feel sludge metal-esque. This unfortunately makes things feel like a bit of a gray mass, though, as there are a lot of times where Spirit of Ecstasy lacks the emotion and textures that it needs to really succeed in all of the density that it presents to the listener. It's cool to do something super heavy and stuff like that, but similar to the more experimental moments here, there needs to be a purpose for that heaviness, and if you're not going to really just put in every ounce of your passion into creating a very moving piece of heavy music, then all you're left with is something very sterile and generally flavorless, and that is unfortunately what Spirit of Ecstasy amounts to. Now, with all of those heavily negative criticisms aside, allow me to say that Spirit of Ecstasy is again very, very promising, similar to Imperial Triumphant's last studio effort, Alphaville. It shows the band continuing to be unique within the realm of avant-garde heavy music and constantly trying to reinvent themselves once again, which is pretty impressive considering they don't really need to reinvent themselves. They could theoretically keep rehashing the same sound and still, for the most part at least, stand out in the current landscape of metal music, but although unfortunately a lot of times the experimentalism just doesn't work here, I can at least say that I respect what they do. While their credibility is largely based on this avant-garde quality and this sort of aspect of their music, there is something to say about a band with a decent-sized fan base, good level of popularity, kind of trying something different, trying something a bit odd, trying something that's pretty much the antithesis of gateway music. This is the kind of stuff that only really die-hard fans of metal, and more specifically avant-garde metal, can really get into, and while I do consider myself a big fan of avant-garde and experimental metal music, I can't even get into this myself. I personally don't find that anything that they try to do here really clicks as heavily as it's intended to, and it's obvious that Imperial Triumphant as an outfit were trying to create something that, in my eyes at least, was a bit more cohesive than what the final product actually was, but I'm sure that this will click for a lot of people. And I really do think that's great, as again, Imperial Triumphant do deliver another dose of experimental work here that I think is really interesting to analyze from a compositional and even tonal perspective overall. They do deliver a lot of great, interesting ideas, and although I don't personally think they're presented in the way that they should be, or at least could have been in a better manner, there are still times where I am left genuinely impressed by what is done here. As I said, there is a variety of different oddball, kind of quirky things that are introduced on this record, and I think overall it's to its benefit for memorability, at least. So although Imperial Triumphant do kind of fail to make a good listening experience, it certainly is a unique one, and although I am disappointed in this album and was hoping for something more distinct overall, I suppose, it is a memorable listen that really does have a lot of unique passages to it, and again, it's just that those passages don't really work in the context of the album, but on their own, isolated from the entirety of Spirit of Ecstasy, they are pretty intriguing. Nonetheless, that doesn't stop the album from being a weak attempt at everything. Unfortunately, as a whole, it's just not working. So overall, Spirit of Ecstasy is a flop, to be sure, but at the same time, it also does deliver some genuinely interesting ideas. It's just that none of them really stick when all put together. I'm going to give this album 2.5 stars out of 5. My one take on this album is that although Spirit of Ecstasy does deliver a number of interesting and overall unique concepts and artistic choices from Imperial Triumphant, the ideas that are presented here just simply don't combine well enough, which leaves the listener with a conceptually intriguing but ultimately execution-wise underwhelming performance. So again, 2.5 stars out of 5, and with that being said, that's the end of this review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.